hi, welcome again from here now. The crowd is in a good mood, so that's always good. Just briefly, we try to cut, so to say, the cake to make it digestible somehow about sustainability, sustainable finance into certain pieces, and having started with the regulatory angle, coming from financial service industry, now moving on to the real economy, and now to we put it as a topical area. What is at stake these days? Financing the transition. This is what we need, and this is what is urgently required. And this is, just the angle from which we look at the next three topics, the presentations. The idea was, looking at how can I affect transition finance, sustainable finance. We can possibly discuss later what sustainable finance effectively should mean, what it has meant a few years ago, what it means today. It's not, really decisive to discuss this, but it's just an interesting point. So we start with the topic of, asset management. What can asset managers, fund providers, the funds industry do, or what it may need to do or change even to make transition finance effective? Where does it stand today? Then we look at the capital markets angle with Francesca afterwards, and after lunch, then we look at the banking perspective with lending, and Diana will touch upon that, and we will discuss this all, of course, then tomorrow again from any relevant perspective. And by the way, and Francesca will address it, I learned that the Capital Markets Union will now be called the Savings and Investment in Union. But anyway, this came up with a new commission, I think yesterday or the day before. So then let me start, and please take into account when listening to what I say, and when it sounds a bit critical, but please be assured I'm telling this also to my clients from the asset management industry, what I'm trying to figure out here. It always depends on, what is your kind of, what is the criteria under which you look at things, and here it is, financing the transition. It's not just having smart ESG investment fund opportunities. It's like SFDR, as we discussed before. Is it fit for purpose as regards transparency? Generally, yes. Did it help legal and regulatory advisors to have a good deal when implementing it? Yes. Did it help investors anyhow? And does it may need some change, including for transition purposes? Likely. And here we look at asset management from a critical perspective of what does it contribute and can it contribute to transition financing. When we are critical, of course, we need to be well prepared. So I start very generally, but we touch upon these issues quite shortly. I usually have them in my presentations in the beginning just to have an understanding, which is in a way comprehensively and common for us, so that you know from where I come and what my key issues are I want to highlight here, and then tackling to the point of ESG investing and transition finance. We all know, this is trivial on the one hand. The two key drivers of policy are, just wanted to repeat and bring a message with it, of course, climate change and the Paris Agreement. And interestingly, you may have noticed, and I mentioned the EU Nature Restoration Law before. You have heard about discussion of, climate risks and biodiversity risks and things like this. I see that one of the important points of evolving regulatory matters is that the focus from climate moves on a bit more to nature more generally from a regulatory perspective also, what is very important and I think required. And until I think a few months ago, it was just self-understanding for myself. I said, look, we got the climate agenda, and we got the SDGs, we got the agenda of the UN agenda, we got the UN Agenda 2030, and then I thought about it when I came across clients who were frequently using SDGs for describing their sustainability strategies. And then we considered issues of greenwashing, and we considered issues of, does it really, fit the purpose they use it for? And if you are, for example, even a local bank, or you are a real economy participant with a business model that does not extend to areas beyond Europe, say Central Europe, say the EU, Question is, what does it have to do effectively with worldwide sustainable development? And in my understanding, these UN goals, of course, the climate issue is global, nature issue is global, and this is global, but if you look at these things, of course, including in the EU, countries have a different kind of stage where they come from and how developed they are in terms of well or even better developed, but this is clearly a difference, to Africa, Asia, Middle, South America. So for me, this is kind of worldwide development. If you look at, poverty, hunger, things like that, you can match it, of course, for local purposes. But today, I would say, very important driver, but be very cautious to use it for your purposes when you are not acting globally. And even if you're acting globally, if the shirts you sell here are produced in Bangladesh, just check with yourself if you are just providing work to those people for, of course, low wages, as it is usual there, or if you're really engaging in sustainable development in the sense of this. So this is for me more a kind of global political agenda, where you can do it this or that way, but just be cautious for being too bold with it locally when you have a local business model. Then, of course, we know the EU action plan. We mentioned it time before. Just want to mention here, it was not an ESG action plan. It was just an action plan focusing on, and I still have the original paper and sometimes read it up, it was about environmental and social aspects facilitated by governance. We know the areas and just want to highlight on the slide, you all know it. It had a certain focus, on the left-hand side in the area of investing. The high-level expert group, which prepared all the things before, at the end of 2017 or during 2017, then the report in January 2018, I believe. It comprised, I think, largely representatives from asset managers, from insurers for the purposes of, their investing. And it didn't really focus on other things like bank lending or even the things you find on the right-hand side. The SFDR was meant under 7, by the way, but anyway. And disclosure was something different. This goes then to CSRD and corporate governance. So you see it also moves from left to right more and more. But this is where we come from. We come from an agenda focused on financial services and focused on investing. We all know the SFDR. Just looking at the SFDR, very briefly, I got it here on one slide. Is it meant for enabling transition? No. It was just meant for, from my point of view, and of course there's influence from those who will be affected. There are numbers, hundreds of people around in Brussels and elsewhere, of course, who discuss with rule makers, and that's their job, that's fair enough, how regulation should be made. And of course they need to be consulted because regulators are usually not practitioners, so it needs to combine. And I believe this served the purpose somehow, on the one hand, of just showing what the state of play was those days, how fund practice worked and how it could, step by step, go ahead with. And then we got this mixture of certain addressees, of only certain products, but fund products in particular being covered, not financial instruments, as under MiFID, only for the purposes of portfolio management, but this is a specific issue. And then we here, for the first time, as far as I'm aware, we found the difference between a distinction between sustainability risk and factors. And in the beginning, we had been a mandate for a German client at a banking association with hundreds of member banks, and we were asking ourselves really for quite some time, what is the difference between risk and factors? What does it mean? What does the legislator want us to tell? And as we're all aware, through these kind of Article 8 and 9 additional disclosure requirements, practice combined it in a way that they thought, so we can label our ESG funds in a way that they even look smarter, or they just fit the purpose of this regulation. And what I always smile a little bit about it when I speak to practitioners and they say, no, our funds are not Article 8 or 9, they are Article 6 funds. And in the beginning I said, look, there are no Article 6 funds because every fund falls under Article 6 inter alia, also under Article 3, 4, 5, blah, blah. And 8 and 9 are additional requirements. Yeah, but anyway, practice uses this approach to explain, but this even shows even more that this is not a labeling exercise here. It has been misunderstood. But I think this is not the main, this is the problem possibly for asset managers, but this is not the main problem with SFDR. that you just use these kind of Article 6, 8, and 9. It's difficult to see if fund is within a category, and it's just in a way conserving, from my point of view, the old approach towards sustainable investments, and we will look at it a bit more detailed later on here. And just by the way, to deal with the RTS, to deal with those tables in the annexes, to deal with those templates, I have not yet met anyone who is an investor, who has really noticed that this exists and or takes care thereof and or uses this for any kind of information. But anyway, but we will see, and it would be interesting to see how this moves on and where it will end up. Yes, this is just showing you, I had the slide anyway, this kind of impact and risk perspective, which we will come back to. We will see it, of course, and we have it under CRD and CRR rules, where then, of course, at the end, you're only interested in the risk perspective. But you find the same thing, called double materiality perspective under the new reporting rules we will talk about tomorrow morning. And here we have the additional issue of the PAI being addressed. And by the way, you may know or not, the CSRD includes the definition of sustainability factors in its definition of sustainability matters, which makes it even more complicated. And one other thing you see, if you look at the sustainability risk, you can say, look, this is an ESG matter involved with an organization, but if you want to identify an impact to the outside world and you use ESG, and the legislator itself didn't do it, you don't find an isolated governance there outside. And this is what we actually see every day when my colleagues do materiality assessments for the purposes of getting sustainability reporting under ESIS together, under the G1 standard. How can you just effectively think it through that the enterprise has an impact on a governance anywhere outside there? But anyway. Taxonomy, you know all about it. Again, this is a green, let's not say brown, this is a green, not green approach. Just practically, I see it quite critical. It's a very cumbersome exercise. I mean, the idea, again, is brilliant. It's a very cumbersome exercise to really get through all these things, including with respect to these minimum safeguards, because just practically the question is, I mean, who in a normal enterprise, coming from the reporting angle, will have ever heard about these principles before and feels capable of just, I mean, it's good for advisors again, doing this. But this shows to me it shows that, and again, like social taxonomy, we are close to a kind of an overwhelming, we want to do and effect all the good things, but we want to address them and effect them all together at the same time. And this makes things, I think, even more complicated, and sometimes this is then just it goes too far. Another example of well tried but failed, having the idea that you effect a transition in the real economy through investments where individual investors are being advised, for example, by bank advisors for the purpose of investment advice, and that those people, within the exercise of the suitability test, where sustainability preferences are, just one small piece, but anyway, but if you then see how the wording goes under the MiFID II amendment, that it says a client's choice, blah, 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 and then a financial instrument, taxonomy, the environmentally sustainable investments, then the sustainable investments under SFDR, and then at the end, where qualitative or quantitative elements are determined by the client. Yeah, so the client says, look, from the RTS, I would like these and these and those. This cannot work in practice, and I don't know anyone in a bank who has really successfully implemented it and used it to make clients more happy and or even to make this effective for the purpose of transition. But you know afterwards better, of course, than before. You try to regulate things which are uncertain, which you want to achieve, and it's difficult to get there. Against the background of SFDR, having possibly a renewal effect sometime in the future, and looking at taxonomy, this may just, in a way, lose its ground, so to say, where it stands on, and then this will also need to be revised, I would believe. But again, and if this is, so to say, the entering door for investments arranged by fund providers, this also doesn't possibly help to get closer to transition finance. As we, again, we see that this is this kind of yes or no approach. It was mentioned already before in the sustainable finance package, and this is what we have also seen in the beginning from Susanne, and I just made a comment on it. What I find interesting in the sustainable finance package is particularly, and I try to highlight it, that it says for the first time, as to my knowledge and perception, that the sustainable finance framework is all about effecting the transition, and it mentions transition finance here, although I said, we are not yet in this kind of middle bubble. We are still at the very beginning trying to get to transition finance. And that then taxonomy as a transition tool, of course, you can pick up various pieces. And taxonomy is not about enterprises, it's about economic activities, and also for reporting purposes. You need to identify each and single economic activity in your enterprise and just check it through. It's not just that you can, at enterprise level, similarly to some extent under SFDR. Of course, this makes sense, but it's, And you can have these bits and pieces and add them together and consider this to be a transition-like. I think this is very important when it says, look, taxonomy, which still in the papers of today from the Commission and others says this is the most important piece of it. But at the same time, they have realized that we need and may need transition plans, because the world is not green and not green, it's moving on. Having said this, we come closer now to my critical remarks about ESG investing and how we can change that, or possibly this could be changed. Again, just repeating, we are aware sustainable finance. I just had the slide before, so I put it in with the investments, and then you want to achieve something in the real economy. If I put it here, of course, this applies also to financial service institutions. There was a discussion from the beginning, regulating the financial service industry first before addressing the real economy. Why has it happened? Because the ones are regulated anyway and the others are not. And how can you regulate the others? Mainly, I believe, only by regulating reporting, what has been effected now, and regulating kind of due diligence obligations and things like that. And this, again, as to my knowledge, is a matter, of course, then of competences of EU legislation and how far this is integrated at EU level anyway. But here we see, talking about transition finance, we don't really find an area where we can allocate it or where we would just kind of identify it. And this is what I didn't mention, but you're aware. Commission has just put this forward, all these things, but combined it with a recommendation. It was no kind of hard legal act, so to say. And interestingly, I read it first time in the original version, and then I came across by accident to the German translation. And first of all, I didn't realize that this is the German translation, because it didn't really talk about transformation or transition. It's, it's there, the way it's translated, you just need to consider twice that this is the same thing they mean. Okay, on the timeline again, you see, it started here with these more or less darker points, and then it moves on to this area, and this is what we also try, of course, to show with the agenda of today, when we then later talk about corporate sustainability and tomorrow. And here you can just follow up. And I mean, I had these 6 boxes from the beginning. I did it first time 3 years ago for a client. Now I need to expand it to 2027 quite soon, I'm sure. And as you see, as greenwashing, in accordance with our agenda, appears to evolve to an own kind of area of focused regulation, and we will have 2 dedicated slots in the afternoon about it. I just found a place here where I could just put it in, but we will hear about it later I find it always interesting to talk about, at least briefly talk about what sustainability, I mean, looking at the clock, we started a few minutes later, but I will, if you have any questions, please at any time interrupt me, otherwise I would just go on speaking in the next 15 minutes, right? Okay. And we can discuss tomorrow and at any time anyway. Talking about sustainability, ESG and things like that, just, why can one be critical about ESG investing and why may it not effectively serve the purposes of transition financing? For some time, I found the most appropriate way to address sustainability with the SDG approach, because this doesn't only include ESG, it includes the political, institutional aspect and the economical. And for example, after the Ukraine war started, people, at least in Germany, I believe, elsewhere also started discussing, what about, armed weapons, state defense, and so on. Is this sustainable to invest in such a corporate, which, for example, in Germany, it's Rheinmetall, which is a big one. The turnover goes this way. And they appear to be well financed, but then people said, look, is this ESG? And they said, don't know. If you look at this, I mean, for good reasons, yeah, and because ESG was invented for other purposes, coming to it in a moment. But looking at this, at least you can explain to yourself. Of course, this is the global, development idea behind, I mentioned before. But anyway, you could, I think, state defense, kind of justified defense of a democratic state towards the outside can be easily subsumed under the left box from my point of view. And what it also shows is that sustainability, and this is what from my point of view and my experience is the classical way, at least in Germany, that this is the combination of economical, environmental, and social issues. It's like, we have a market economy, we have a social market economy, and we are moving towards a social and hopefully properly environmentally market economy. And ESG looks from outside at an enterprise from an investor's perspective and addresses, as you know, environmental, social governance. It was just meant for the purpose of, identifying issues within an enterprise which fit under these boxes. Why this is the case in a moment. And just, taking a step back and looking at things just from a piece of paper view, what do I find important? And this is what, when we talk to clients and clients are struggling with establishing their own sustainability view, their ambition, their sustainability targets and strategy, which they also now need for reporting purposes. At least they need to report if they have it or not. Quite widespreadly now they haven't. But if you just look at what is the challenge, and if I'm, for example, an enterprise, what are the most relevant challenges for me? You need to prioritize. Of course, you need to comply with regulation, but you could find this just an important piece, and you just don't need to look at things under the ESG heading, because this is a challenge enough, and you see it goes along with social issues invariably. And another thing is, and this of course has also been picked up by regulation. This is what I meant before. Yeah, don't please do it not any time at the same time in the same pot, so to say, and address everything at the same time. This is what I find also a bit critical about ESG, because there's so different things you try to address with it. You can look at human rights from a global commercial perspective, and here I put again human rights in a political context. This is like, investing in a US government bond, for example, irrespective of the government, just in terms of the death penalty, which is being executed still, and armed forces and sovereign defense I mentioned before. So if you find this an important angle to look at, and you find it an important objective from a kind of political perspective, and sustainability is about having an own view, it's subjective generally. Many things are scientific, fortunately, as regards the E, but you need to make decisions, and these decisions are critical and difficult. Now we move on to, and we are good in time, ESG investing to transition finance. Yeah, the beginnings of ESG, as far as I'm aware, I did some research, and I found this paper of, and I have some things printed. This was just at the time when I was still printing. Today, at least legal text, I have stopped to print because I printed the ESRS. And then, of course, in the German version, all the annexes have been changed, 289 pages. I mean, they have been revised completely because the translation was somehow crap. Yeah? Anyway. But this is a paper which comes from a global context generally, and you see the Global Compact, and it's from 2004. And the first time I've seen it, it was 2-3 years ago, or possibly 4 years ago, and I read it and I thought, is this from last week? Yeah? It clearly addresses, you see, climate change and related risks, for example. But then you ask yourself, was it 20 years ago, and what has happened since then? And this is just like, could have been a few years ago or a few months ago, and there are some kind of famous players have been involved. I picked this up from a German report, which is quite widespread, and I try to provide you in the red boxes with some German kind of translations for the purposes of you may need them. This is it's called Forum Nachhaltige Geldanlagen. It's kind of a forum for sustainable investments. This is it's market participants have set up a certain kind of informal organization. A branch of that organization provides for certain kind of labels you can apply for when you are a fund provider. So they have, of course, a self-interest in looking at the asset management market from a positive angle and in terms of promoting it as it is. What I want to show you here is, and I got 2 slides therefore. First one is the report and it's covering Germany and Austria, and I just picked up for the purpose of you can read it, but for Austria it has not been completely different. Here the figures for Germany from the last year report, 2022 compared to 2021, and the newest report is on the next slide. And you see, what are the most used investment strategies, both for funds for private investors and for institutionals. Exclusions even gone up, to 95%. Engagement, those which you understand yourself, I didn't translate. Voting, 88. Norm-based screening. ESG integration, whatever that means, irrespective of the others. Best in class, okay, went back, and topical funds. And interestingly, impact investment, back from 7 to 1%. From the beginning, I found it quite interesting that asset managers identify funds which appear to be something very odd, strange, and different from the mainstream as impact investing. As I always thought that having a certain impact should be a natural part and content of a fund doing sustainable things. But this is not the case. Impact, but in a way means like I'm building schools in Africa and things like this, which appears to be, to a certain extent, more under the SDG angle and not for the purposes of getting return and doing good things. But I would say also this is the old way of looking at it. And if you then look at our most famous exclusions, these are some things I think you can understand yourself. I didn't translate it. These are all weapon things here in the beginning, ABC weapons, human rights, labor law, corruption, alcohol, and things like this. Of course, you don't want to invest into this generally, but here you see, these are very widespread, or have been very widespread. And looking at the most recent, thing is from this year, looking back to last year. Exclusions remain still high, engagement also. ESG integration has moved on. All the other things remain. Okay, voting goes a bit back. And now impact investment goes to 11%. You never know if things are classified differently, and how this really works. And again, you know, all these kind of armed weapons and things like this, human rights. Of course, you find fossil fuels, coal within it, which is a classical way of excluding things. And then you are close to the point where the pain starts to be appearing when you move on to a transition. You know, what does it mean? Does it help if there is a coal plant which may need to be transformed in a certain way, or steel is not excluded here, or even say a steel plant, this needs to be moved towards transition for the coal plant. This may mean it needs to be when going down, yeah, in its operations, but this is still an exercise. And if I'm an asset manager and I sell shares in such a corporate, the corporate and the shares still exist afterwards. You know, I've just made myself free of that, but the investment as such is still in the world. It doesn't disappear when I say I don't invest in that. That's just a question. I don't have an answer, but I think this needs to be taken serious, because you could also say it is greenwashing when I'm an asset manager and I say I dispose of a certain asset, and so yeah, I'm doing good things, but it's still there, the asset. But you have taken care of it somehow. You should have, if you are engaging and if you are doing voting. But now I don't. I leave it to others. It's a difficult thing. I call it Babylonian confusion. You know, looking at from the practical angle where these Article 8 and 9 products, how these would be characterized, and what all the other things are, and they, you know, they're all around. Sometimes they move into one of those categories, sometimes not. Of course, they can also move here. And then the terms of ESG integration and strategy, you never really know what it means. It appears to be a combination of all these things. And then, you know, some people call it impact. Some have realized they mean different things. And the sustainability-linked loan bond and green bond issue, we will hear about them, I believe, in a moment. Also a thing where you can just look which goes under what kind of category and what does it mean. Again, looking at transition requirements, I don't know. Once again, I'm still underway in terms of looking at ESG investing critically. If you look at a kind of up-to-date usual fund under ESG, under the ESG angle, I believe this still means the economic sustainability of the enterprise, of the investment, will be looked at first and will be analyzed anyway. So, and this is where, as I would say, exclusion criteria apply. You know, it's just business model oriented. It doesn't look at the enterprise any longer. You just, you know, put it from your list. Of course, you look at governance issues, because this is the second easiest thing, so to say. But there you have laws and regulations, so you don't need to do so many things in addition. Of course, you can deal with if Mr. Musk is in a certain way a special person, and then you need to consider if all the important inventions have been provided by very usual people or by special people. But this is just subjective. You need to decide. Social issues are also widely governed by laws and regulations, at least in the EU. And when it comes to environmental and climate things, and you would like to have a transition aspect within it, then it becomes a little bit smaller in terms of what is effectively done. So I try to, you know, it's black and white, and it's just to provoke a bit, mind the gap, yeah, and as I say, ESG, and I think this is quite important when being a bit critical about transition. ESG was not meant, it was not kind of introduced by regulators, by legislators. If it was 2004, if it was the first time, I don't know, someone will have used it, but it has been developed and it has been, so to say, invented in the world, and it was in Germany where you use 3 or 4 letter abbreviations every day. We have longer words, and we find it difficult to have abbreviations for this. But of course, we have picked up ESG. But people just, you know, they were inventing health funds, future funds, I don't know, water funds, and then they thought we may also have a ESG fund. It was making fund products smarter, just attractive for investors. This is all legitimate, this is all fine, but it doesn't help us from a transition perspective, to move on, also from a regulatory angle, just conserving the old world of ESG investing and the old approach, which was not for a certain purpose. It was just making possibly a bit better things than others. But if you look at best in class or things like that, you just have certain kind of numbers and figures, and then you look at tables. I always take the example. The figures are wrong, but in terms of if you look at the MSCI World Index, Microsoft has a share of 6%, and if you look at the MSCI World ESG Index, then Microsoft has a share of 12%. Can be, may not. Another piece where fund practice needs to improve and is about to improve, and I'm speaking to those people and they say, yeah, look, you're all right, but how could we just make our own transformation towards that? Because we have promoted ESG funds for such a long time with all these exclusions and so on, and NGOs and others blame us if we just deviate from that approach. And now you would like us to invest into steel companies for the purposes of getting the transition done with them. Of course, this is a different angle, and this appears to be a bit kind of controversial and ambiguous. And what has been fund practice all the time, just for everyone's sake and everyone's interest, risk management. Yeah? And SFDR picked this piece up, of course, for transparency purposes. The second one was also more or less introduced, the external impact perspective with the PAIs. But what we would need, is just positive impacts which are related to transition somehow. And a very simple picture, just trying to summarize. On the left-hand side, this is energy generation, power generation, and the carbon footprint, and this is substitution by 20 specific, be it taxonomy-aligned energy projects, wind mills, wind farms, so on, all fine. And this is, I think, still the regulatory approach and still the approach to date, including in particular from taxonomy. And if you have here a carbon-heavy industrial enterprise which needs to move down, and I believe this is what is most required, and we are talking to kind of medium-sized enterprises more or less every day. They are complaining loudly, but they have a transition agenda, and they need to address it, and they are reluctant quite widely to do it. But this is what you need to effect, and this is what I would call transition finance. It's not these single projects you can identify piece by piece. It is just within a certain framework, cutting things down. And I believe this just happens by investing into those enterprises and helping them to raising the funds. And we all know, looking at the steel industry, for example, Germany, which is heavily struggling these days for various reasons. Has a general structure problem, a pricing problem, and so on. And of course, it has the heavy transformation problem. And the state, is Germany, the German federal state is financing this with billions of money, of euros. Yeah? But of course, private investors need to take their share. And just finally, we have, come along the ESA's opinion with, and in the presentation of Chiara in particular before, where now the transition category is mentioned, and it addresses somehow, that transition will need to be relevant for the purposes of going ahead with SFDR revision. Here again, by the way, you find the social taxonomy piece, but just by the way. And the question is, of course, how can you and would you like to classify products in a way, that you catch transition and it makes some sense, but this is really a difficult exercise. And then the opinion, which was also mentioned before, where, it's even more publicly shown that the way towards transition is so important and that ESMA is promoting this loudly. Interestingly, the FCA, I'm still looking a bit, over there, has last year, again, you may know this, has tried to kind of have its own sustainability disclosure requirements regime with 4 categories, where here it tries to match it with SFDR, where you interestingly see Article 8 and 9 in the big box all together. And on the right-hand side, the new categories which had been proposed or others under the SFDR. And here it says sustainability improvers, and this matches with the transition focus. And finally, what I want to mention, because it's not explicitly in the presentation, but it's important in this context, you're aware of the ESMA guidelines on fund names. I just want at the end to mention them briefly. I didn't pick them up for the purposes here. I believe they are, again, they do not provide really for transition purposes. It's again meant to somehow properly address the current practice and to align it with some ambition. And you have seen it refers to SFDR, and it refers to a delegated regulation to the benchmark regulation, and it refers to exclusions once again. And the main difference is that the ones of the funds where you have some requirements for the names, reference is made to exclusions without coal and other industries, and for transition purposes, well done, and for the others, they are all included there. So what I want to say is, from ESG investing to transition finance is a journey. It's not easy, and regulation still may need to provide guidance, which is really helpful. And but I think the industry, if it should fulfill its task and purpose in that respect for redirecting finance flows, at least from the asset management perspective, I believe it has still a room for improvement. But it's always good to have an ambition and to have a task for tomorrow. But transition is required now, tomorrow, and the day over tomorrow, and not in 2038. Thanks.